Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everyone. Wow. Let's bring a little light to our suffering. Oh, talking to the mic, that would help, yes, wouldn't it? I can spread all my papers out. It's pretty funny. So I remember back when I was just beginning to learn about positive affirmations, and I was thinking, well, what about all the things that aren't going right? What about those things? And I ignored them. And as a consequence, I never used the word suffering because I affirmed that I was not a person who suffered. And yet, as I get older, I get wiser. And so I'm going to acknowledge that I do suffer, I have suffered, and I most likely will suffer in the future, along with everyone else. So even during my cancer treatment, I kept saying, well, this could be worse. And I mean, it certainly has an effect. A positive attitude is extremely important. But we can't use that to deny that suffering exists. And I just got very curious about suffering. So I've spent 2 months trying to learn about suffering. So if I talk about this part and that part and that part, and move it all around, I probably will, because I just kind of absorbed lots of ideas from lots of different places. And one thing was interesting to me is that I've heard for a long time the saying, in life, pain is a given, suffering is optional, which separates pain from suffering. And I don't think it's necessary to separate it quite that much. Because we may think of suffering as optional, but I don't think it is. There are many people who say it's not a choice. Suffering is not a choice. We do suffer. And I really believe that we need to suffer in order to grow. That as the spirit within us, as the human being within our spirit confronts the possibility of suffering, we grow, and we use suffering to bring ourselves wiser and higher. Because profound and deep changes in our lives come through suffering. As much as we can accept and use and process, we can take advantage of our suffering. So Buddhism has a good understanding about suffering. They say it's caused by desire and craving pleasure and things. And it gives a little list of physical suffering: pain, illness, disability. It was interesting to me to read all these possibilities: pain, illness, disability, hunger, poverty, addictions, and death. Emotional and mental suffering, which we have also, consist of grief, hatred, frustration, humiliation, heartbreak, anxiety, guilt, loneliness, and depression. And it's not laughable, but I mean, if I was subject to humiliation, I would never get up in front of you and speak a word, never. So that's one as that's one part of suffering that I'm still willing to engage in and use, because the kind of exhilaration that I feel afterward is really, and even during, in fact, is profound. And so I choose that kind of suffering in order to experience freedom, a sense, a kind of freedom. So suffering triggers change, but it's not always positive. It's not always positive. So our work is inner work. Our work is inner work. So I have a quote from Khalil Gibran. Out of suffering has emerged the strongest souls, the most massive characters are seared with scars. So if you are seared with scars, and I know you are, consider yourself a massive character. Many people who have made extraordinary contributions to life on earth have been through great suffering. Eckhart Tolle was extremely depressed as a young man. He was very close to committing suicide. He sat down and just looked and watched and contemplated what was going on, and discovered that there was a difference between who he was in his internal being and the suffering that was happening to his body and his mind. Tony Robbins was kicked out of his house at 18. His mother decided that when she kicked his father out, she decided he was too close to his father and kicked him out as well. And he was 18, and he had a very hard time. He was, and he met Jim Rohn, who's also I don't know how to say it quite, but a very positive teacher. And for some years he struggled, and then he met with great success. So Larry and I kicked out our son Alex. He was 24. He spent all his time at night and day on the computer playing video games. This was his life. I think at that time he had been fired from one of his jobs. I don't know if it was the Whole Foods job, which he was fired from, or the other one. But the only way the two of us had enough courage to kick Alex out was that a friend of ours had the same thing happen to him, and he had had a positive experience of that as a result of being kicked out of his house. So we did it. Alex eventually forgave me. He has a good job now, making much more money than I've ever made in my life per year, and he has forgiven me, and we're good friends now. It's very pleasant and positive. But I thought about, as I was thinking about suffering, I was thinking, how can we suffer less? And of course, everything that led up to my talk was about how to suffer less. So you've really had your lesson. I mean, I don't have I don't have a whole lot to add to the reading or the song. I mean, it was amazing. It was amazing. But when we're suffering, we feel terrible. And we feel either in our head or our stomach or our body. If it's an emotional thing, we feel it in our body. And it's an extraordinary struggle to separate ourself from the struggle itself, to separate ourself from the thoughts that have taken us into suffering. That deep dive we find is our suffering, and we feel out of control. And the task is not to gain control, which might be impossible. Our task is to watch. Our task is to know that the part of us, according to Barbara Brodsky, the part of us that is watching ourselves suffer is not suffering. And if we practice that, just practice that a little bit, and you will find that this part of, that there is a difference between who you are and the part of you that is suffering. And it's important to make no judgments along the way. So Tony Robbins tells us that gratitude is the quickest way to end suffering. And we don't always take the time to make a list or to even think very much about those things that we really love in our life, that are really positive in our life. And so it's always good if we can, as we separate ourselves from our suffering. He also reminds us to stand guard at the doorway to our minds. With conscious awareness, we can remember we don't believe all of our thoughts. If you're a meditator at all, you know that as you sit down, all of a sudden you're aware of hundreds of thoughts, just one right after the other, and they're not about anything extremely important, because meditation is just a kind of a spilling out, and not always, but often. For me, it's just a spilling out of all these meaningless thoughts. So a few weeks ago, Brett Kuhn told us, take responsibility and you will suffer less. And it's not that I have a great memory for other people's talks, but I wrote it down because it just felt really, really important to me, because we suffer. I suffer. And I'm not suffering because my house is burned down. I'm not suffering because I was in an accident and I don't have transportation. It's just kind of this nagging suffering that we do. So I don't spend a lot of time wondering why or what I chose in the past, or the path that took me to the place I am now. I really try to be present. I really don't spend any time regretting the choices I've made, even though that's certainly possible, because I've made lots of choices that I know weren't necessarily the best. But somehow I've managed to not make my unskillful choices into my own suffering. So everything we choose, taking responsibility for everything we choose, frees us and empowers us, whether it's the present, whether it's the past. But if we do, we will feel stronger and we will suffer less. Forgiveness is a very powerful tool here. There's a book by David Feldman and Lee Kravitz, and I didn't find it, but I read about it. It's called Super Survivors: The Surprising Link Between Suffering and Success. Common traits of people who recover from trauma and experience post-traumatic growth: hope, social support, forgiveness, and spirituality. And it occurred to me, as I was thinking about reasons why some of us seem to suffer less, I thought, We know too much. We know too much to suffer. We've actually been in contact with our own suffering, and we know what it feels like, and we use whatever tools we need, whatever we can think of, to move that suffering into not suffering. We know who we are. We know why we're here. We are human beings having a spiritual experience, and we are here to love and to serve each other in love. And I maintain that we are quicker to turn our suffering into not suffering, into some kind of survivor mode. We know how to do it. We've had lots of practice. And the difference is we've had lots of conscious practice. Where we suffer less because we are less afraid of death. We're not trying to grasp a reality that we made up in the first place. And I wrote here, look around you. What part of what you see did you make up? All of it. I think we made all of it. And so we come back to the idea of responsibility and choice. And my older sister, the psychologist, does not believe that all of us have a choice. And she may be right. I have a brother with PTSD, very severe, and I have a sister, both of these younger than I am, who's depressed and suffering from different various diseases, and both of them living alone, and it's got to be hard. They're suffering. There's no question about it. So I've had trouble with my hands in the last couple of years, and I've had trigger fingers, which is a tightening of the bands that go around the joints, I think. And so 3 times I've had to go to the to St. Joe's, to the orthopedic building, and I have a doctor named Dr. Lee, and I have to get cortisone injections, and when I do, I always yell, and I hope, ow, ow, and I hope that it doesn't scare too many people. But then when I'm leaving, I say to him, I hope I never see you again. And that is, it's so true. It's just so true, but everybody laughs. So Aaron, speaking words through Barbara Brodsky, reminds us that the part of us that watches our suffering is not suffering. And so as a consequence, we have a choice to take a higher perspective. And our search for pleasure, our search for relief is not our motivation for using all the tricks and all the methods, aside from denial, maybe. Maybe that's not the best choice to use for processing our suffering. Breathing deeply, being present with all of it, just being present can just change everything in a very short time. The search for pleasure is not our motivation, but our loving kindness is. Love, kindness, service, self-expression, expressing ourselves through music, through words, through gardening, through walking, through nature, all of those things. Self-expression is very important. And as I get older, especially being alone as I am now, I'm much more aware of my desire to enjoy all the time I have left. I mean, it's funny. It took me a long time to get to this place, but I'm glad. I don't regret being here. It's interesting because aging has its own special gifts. That's for sure. We have more capacity to heal than we know. And we can choose. We choose the strength and beauty and love of the human spirit. I want to read, as I finish, I want to read a little bit from The Untethered Soul, The Journey Beyond Yourself, Michael Singer. And Maurice brought this book years ago, and it's a very, very powerful book. He's a great teacher. All these people that I've mentioned are on YouTube. I mean, it's just fascinating and refreshing. So this is from his chapter called Pain, the Price. Pain, let's see, pain. Oh, I wanted to mention, Laurie Coburn sent out some cartoons that I read this morning, and the one I liked was these two Buddhist monks saying to each other, give me a sec. I really like, something to the effect, I really like this having achieved enlightenment, but I kind of miss the suffering. This is from a chapter called Pain, the Price of Freedom. Now I lost my page. Oh, no. I'll find it. Oh, here it is. This is the core of spiritual work. When you are comfortable with pain passing through you, you will be free. The world will never be able to bother you again because the worst the world can do is to hit the pain stored within you. If you do not care, if you are no longer afraid of yourself, you are free. You will then be able to walk through this world more vibrant and alive than ever before. You will feel everything at a deeper level. You will begin to have truly beautiful experiences rise up within you. Eventually, you will understand that there is an ocean of love behind your fear and pain. And now it's your turn. I hope you've been listening.